this. So I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order now. Welcome everyone to the April 20th, 2020 meeting of the Alpharetta City Council. And as I noted, we do apparently have everyone here, although I can't see Councilman Burnett. He does show up as registered for the meeting, and he's probably just looking, there he is. I thought maybe he was just looking for a virtual background or something there. So as usual, we will go ahead and begin with a pledge to the flag. So if you will join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So thank you all for being here. Everyone that's tuned in this evening. Number of in attendance right now in this view, but I believe there were about 26. It was the last I saw. So we will go ahead and begin tonight's meeting with the consent agenda. Consent agenda is the council meeting minutes for the meeting from April 1st, 2020 and April 6th, 2020. Is there anyone who would like to remove anything from the consent agenda this evening? I'm not seeing anyone. So I'll call for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Looked like I might have had Councilman Merkel. Who was the second? Councilman Burnett? Does that sound right? Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Merkel and a second by Councilman Burnett to approve the consent agenda. I'll go ahead and call the roll for a vote. Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell.
Approve.
Approve. Councilman Hypes, do you approve or not?
Approve.
Councilwoman Richard?
Approve.
Councilman Merkel?
Approve.
Councilman Burnett?
Approve.
And Councilman Binder?
Approve.
And I approve it as well, so the consent agenda does pass unanimously. That'll wrap up the consent agenda, and we'll move on to the workshops for this evening. First item on the workshop agenda is the bridge improvements over Georgia 400. Mr. Sasevich, I believe you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight is the bridge improvements over Georgia 400, which is a recap of the Webb Bridge Road and the Kimmel Bridge Road improvements that Eric Bosman presented to you a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, as well as the trade winds. And we got the plans from the Georgia Department of Transportation, and they have applied similar aesthetics of improvements to the Encore light version, if you want to call it, to what they're able to do at trade winds. And within your packet, you should have the exhibits, the 3D renderings that Kimley-Horn has developed. And with that, I'm going to lead it over to Eric Bosman of Kimley-Horn to walk you through it. You do a much better job than I can, and his team did a great job of preparing all of these exhibits, as well as some cost estimates we could talk about down the line. Eric?
Great. Thank you, Pete. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing us to join you this evening. I want to mention as well, my colleague Winston Mitchell is also on the call this evening, who's helped put these materials together. And I believe we're going to be able to put the graphics up on the screen for you all to see. And as Mr. Sasevich said, our goal here is really to do two things. One is to give you an update on how the standards that you all helped select on February 17th at the last work session have been applied to new information that we have received from the Department of Transportation related to Kimball and to Webb Bridge. And then we also want to talk about how we have applied those standards to trade winds, which you will see is a very different conceptual design than the linear fashion of Kimball and Webb Bridge Road. So what you see on the screen right now is a full computer model of the Kimball Bridge Road application. And as we reviewed on February 17th, the kit of parts that we're using here are concrete pylons, concrete paver pylons that are very similar to that were constructed on Encore, but much thinner because of the lack of width of this bridge. The pylons are located both on the ends of the bridges as well as the center column. And the center column is able to support a City of Alpharetta logo in the middle of that column if we choose to include that as part of the design. We've relocated the lights onto poles that are on the columns, consistent with what we talked about on February 17th. That gets the light poles out of the middle of the sidewalk because we have smaller sidewalk widths here, and puts them all in line at the same height across the bridge to apply a level of uniformity. We have the same vertical fencing as Encore, but with no canopy due to the reduced sidewalk widths. And what the model is sort of showing or alluding to is still the potential to hand paint the concrete on top of the bridge, but not underneath the bridge. And as we get to trade winds, we'll come back and talk about why that is the case. As you look at this from Georgia 400, this is if you're in the general purpose lanes and you see sort of the uniformity and the simplicity and the elegance of the design across the top of Georgia 400. Then we'll go up on top of the bridge and you're looking at the south sidewalk here. What we've looked at in terms of the cross section is a 12-foot sidewalk on the south side of the bridge being recommended and an 8-foot sidewalk on the north side of the bridge. What that allows us to do is have the 12-foot on the south side that does qualify and can be used as a multi-purpose trail for a variety of users. It can be categorized, and still an 8-foot sidewalk on the north side that prevents it from getting a little too skinny and thin in terms of user comfort. The last thing you'll see on the top here is the median with a concrete paver that we are able to work into the Kimball Bridge Road because of the additional width that we have on Kimball that we do not have on Webb. So that's an application of what those standards that we talked about on February look like on Kimball Bridge. On Webb Bridge, there was a new wrinkle that we learned about after the council meeting, that whereas on Kimball, we have one center support set of columns in the middle of the bridge, on Webb Bridge, because the transit lanes go down the middle of the bridge, we actually have two sets of support columns. So there's not a way to have a center pylon on Webb Bridge the way that there is on Kimball Bridge. So in modifying the design a little bit, what you'll see are the two center pylons. We looked at a variety of different design orientations here, but really felt like having those center pylons over the bridge supports was the most appropriate moving forward. It does make the bridge look a little bit longer, and we don't have that center column, but you see what it looks like with the two center columns positioned over those central supports. Again, what it looks like on Georgia 400, the sidewalk widths on Webb, we have 10 feet less on Webb Bridge than we have on Kimball Bridge. So on Webb Bridge, we have a 9-foot sidewalk on the south, a 6-foot sidewalk on the north, and as you'll notice, no central median because we do not have room for it there. So that gives you an idea of taking those design standards that we talked about on February, applying them to Kimball and to Webb, showing both sides now of the model instead of a singular side, what you can sort of expect in the implementation of those designs. And we'll come back if you have any comments or questions on those in just a moment. If we move to trade winds, this is a very different configuration of an interchange. So what the team has proposed to GDOT, the design team that they are working with, is what's referred to as a single point urban interchange. And because of the skew with which that goes across Georgia 400, you see sort of the size of what this interchange begins to look like. It's still a 2-lane road, 1 lane in each direction, but it has sort of XL and decel lanes to get people onto and off of those express lanes as they come up onto the bridge. Because of this different configuration, we don't think that the pylon-shaped columns actually works on trade winds. Those pylon-shaped columns work really well when it's sort of the terminating point to the bridge, but when it's in the middle, And there would be so many of them on this bridge because of the interruptions. We went back to the more narrow column, but raised in the vertical plane so that on each edge, you get sort of that strong vertical column with the smaller columns in the middle, but it doesn't feel quite as massive if we had put the pylons that are sort of the diagonal shaped columns on every end of this. And frankly, in the middle of the bridge, we really don't have the width to be able to add those pylons because of the angle at which the express lanes are coming up onto the bridge. So that gives you an idea of the overhead. If we click forward, this is what that bridge design looks like if you're in the general purpose lanes on 400, or if you're in the express lanes that are going through the bridge. The next shot looks at it from the transit lanes, which go through the middle. And then the final shot as you're coming up, taking the express lane or the managed lane exit point up to and onto the bridge. The one decision that we have an opportunity to make, well, we definitely want your input on all of these different pieces, but if we move up to looking at the overhead view, one of the things that's still very much in play is how to handle the pedestrian experience on trade winds. Now, what the designers initially showed, you'll see the gray lines that are basic 5-foot sidewalks, and that's what the GDOT design, the preliminary design showed. In following up with GDOT, there's quite a bit of space between that 5-foot sidewalk and the outside of the bridge that we could make that whole area pedestrian space. And if we make that whole area that's both the gray and the tan, where you see our ghost people, our silhouettes, all of that could be pedestrian space, but at that size, it probably makes sense to provide a little bit of safety and separation for those pedestrians from the cars. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. The first option is to possibly put a barrier wall. So if we click to the next slide, to put a small barrier wall, a knee-high wall basically between the travel lanes and the sidewalks. What that would allow is once the pedestrians get back to the ends of the bridges, there would be a little separation there. Now, the exact location of that wall, we still need to work with the Department of Transportation because they're going to dictate how close that wall can be to the travel lane or how far away it needs to be based on the design speed of the bridge. So that's an approximate location for the wall. If the wall feels like we're adding a little too much hardscape, the other direction would be to put movable planters. Now, the planters don't have to be this shape or size. This is just a visual example of what it could look like. The planters would allow something a little less in terms of providing so much concrete and hardscape up on the bridge and would provide an opportunity for a little bit of greenery, but obviously that greenery would have to be very carefully selected for the environment that it would be growing in and would have to be maintained over time. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the possibilities that we have both in applying the design that we set for Kimball and Webb to trade winds, although it being with the more slender columns based on the particulars of this design, and a couple of options that we have for how we can handle the pedestrian experience. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, let me pause and see what comments or questions there may be from council.
Sorry, I was muted. Councilman Burnett has desired to ask you a question, Eric. So thank you for your presentation.
I have two on the first two. You can take these in either order, Eric, and thanks for joining us tonight. On the supports in the middle, is there any, well, first, how raised up, if these are multi-purpose trails for Kimball and Webbridge Road, how high are they raised up just for purposes of safety? And is there anything to keep those people on the sides? Are they, is there any safety measure that we could somehow do, just because for all intents and purposes, they're bridges that are what are going to cross a 10-lane interstate. So I want to make sure that if there's a lot of people there, just for pedestrian safety, is there anything besides just exposure and curb to protect people, or is that open for debate or conversation? And the second question I have, if you want to take these in the event that they go together, can you go back to I forgot which one had, I believe it was Webbridge, where there were 2 support columns. Right there, yeah. Is that taking into consideration that that middle lane may at some point have something to do? I realize right now the thought process is BRT or so forth, but I just want to make sure that we don't have to tear a bridge down should political agendas down the road win and there's a train that heads up to Windward Parkway. I'll let you take those 2.
Sure. So Mr. Sisevich may have to help me with part of the first one. In terms of the vertical separation, I do believe what GDOT is showing on their plans right now is a standard 6-inch to 8-inch curb. So the vertical separation between the sidewalks and the travel lanes is that standard 6 to 8-inch. In terms of physical separation and barrier, there are sort of 2 things working against us there. One is the width of the sidewalk in and of itself. I think your point is well taken that folks are unlikely to use the front 2 feet of that sidewalk because it's going to feel very close to the travel lane. There is a gutter that will be there, but it is up against the travel lane. If we did want to put some sort of vertical separation, that vertical separation would have to have the level of GDOT clearance that we talked about with the wall on trade winds. So we can look at that, but I think our fear would be the separation that they would require would push pretty far into the sidewalk and restrict the sidewalk to a width that it would no longer qualify as a multi-purpose trail.
So my last question we have largely, and I'll let somebody else speak to it later, we have an agreement in place with the Georgia Department of Transportation, or at least a letter they have sent to us acknowledging what their expectation is of the city of Alpharetta. With that being said, can you go to the trade winds slide where you showed all the, I don't even want to say diamond interchanges because that's, I mean, wildly aggressive. Is there a thought process to potentially restrict pedestrian traffic to one side? I just see so many opportunities for somebody to get hurt. And that's, and the only thing I wanted to say in addition to that, I just wanted to make sure that with the expectations that GDOT has asked us for a financial contribution, that this is clearly included in that, because it looks a lot more aggressive than anything we saw when we sat down with them 3 or 4 months ago. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Councilman Burnett, I mean, I think we could definitely look at restricting pedestrian traffic to one side. There are interchanges of this type where pedestrian access is prohibited entirely, which I think is something we don't want to do here. But I think there's definitely a conversation we could have with the department. And just to make sure that we address it and don't leave it behind, the other question about the center columns in Webb, that is to allow 2 transit lanes up the middle of the bridge. So regardless of what type of transit goes there, that is to the spacing of that Webb bridge with the double support columns is to provide transit space in the middle.
All right, Eric. I believe that was all from Councilman Burnett. He's muted at least, so we'll take that as being it. And I believe Councilman Heights has a question for you. Councilman Heights? He may be muted.
Thank you, James. Eric, I've got a question about trade winds that's also pedestrian safety related. It looks as though there wouldn't be any need for any traffic lights other than, will there be any traffic lights to make the left-hand turns to go to the on-ramp? In both directions, you're making a left turn to get to the on-ramp?
Yes, so sorry, Councilman. So the short answer is yes. It does not show up in the model, but part of the way that this interchange works is it's a single traffic signal that is coordinated that sits overhead in the middle of the bridge. So it is one traffic signal that controls all of the movements on the bridge.
And there's sufficient feeder lanes for right-hand turn into the on-ramps, such that if the traffic light for a left turn backs up the traffic, there's still room to get to the right and go onto the on-ramp.
That is my understanding, yes.
It was in the form of a question, but I'm not sure. I'm looking at one diagram from the packet, and it looks like going eastbound, there is a dedicated right lane on-ramp, so that if traffic backed up for anybody wanting to make a left turn northbound, traffic would still flow onto the southbound on-ramp. It doesn't appear to be the same when you're on the other side of the bridge driving west, and that's one part of the reason for my question.
I see what you're saying. Yes, on the overhead view, there's 3 arrows on one side versus 2. We need to go back and look. My understanding is it should be consistent on both sides of the bridge. We need to go back and look at GDOT's drawings, which I will admit we struggled for a week or so to get all of our questions answered and get the clarity. But I do believe that the right turn lanes onto the express lanes in both directions did have their own dedicated entry lane onto those right turn lanes.
And would the traffic signals be usable in terms of helping the pedestrians get across to stop traffic so that they know that they have access without somebody flying into the on-ramp?
Yeah, we will need to coordinate that with the department. The department's plans did show pedestrian sidewalks. So by virtue of showing the sidewalks, we are assuming that all of the appropriate design standards would be met, but that is something we can try to confirm.
Thank you.
I was mouthing that I've been muted. Thank you, James. Do we have any other questions from council at this time? I'm not seeing any at this time, so thank you, Eric. Do you have enough information to move forward, or do you have any other questions you need us to answer at this time?
So thank you, Mayor. I think from a timeline standpoint, if council is generally good with the design, there's 2 things I think to be aware. One is GDOT's timeline is for us to get them some preliminary materials by the end of this month and to complete the bid package. So basically the information that they've requested based on these designs has to be completed by June 30th. So that's the timeline that I'm saying. The other caveat, and I think this is an important one, particularly related to some of the questions on trade winds, is the way that the department bidding this project is through concept and preliminary drawings. These are not final design documents that these designs are based off of. The developer who will be selected to actually construct the project does have flexibility to update and alter the design as they implement the project. So one of the things that we're having to be very careful with is what we're putting together is a set of design standards that then will be applied by the department and the developer to whatever the final design is. So know that what we're showing you are concepts, and the designs are based on those concepts, but are flexible in a way that as this project evolves by the department and the developer, they will be flexible and have to adjust. And there will be sort of some ongoing coordination that will be necessary as this project evolves based on the way it is being implemented.
Thank you. I believe Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell raised his hand.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to thank Eric Bosman and Winston Mitchell for all the work they've done on this. I think it's consistent with the Alpharetta look and will help our economic development as we move further along, especially as far as attracting new businesses for a consistent look throughout our city. You did ask one question about planters versus wall, and I'd be interested to know if any other council members have some concerns. I have the concerns about the planters being there. They're hard to water. They're hard to maintain. I personally think the knee-high wall would be a better, more sustainable solution for the future that's much more cost-effective as well. But and then I like the idea of putting the logo on the bridge on both sides, since we can do that. Thank you for your work on these.
I actually like the look of the planters more than the walls themselves, but I agree that having living plants in there is not feasible. So maybe if there's some kind of architectural feature that would break it up and have that same openness, then that might be an option. But I agree, we don't want to have to pay somebody to be out there every day during July to water those planters. I'm assuming GDOT would not be amenable to doing that themselves. Do we have any other questions or comments?
I'd like to add one extra thank you out to the North Fulton CID. The North Fulton CID has been taking care of the expenses associated with the renderings that we've all been looking at. So thank you, Brandon and Kristen, for that, and the board.
Yes.
Also, Eric mentioned task two being the design standards that have to move forward with. That will be an agenda item, hopefully an agenda next week for Mayor and Council to take a look at. We've already moved forward with task one through the normal procurement process through finance, and that is to have the preliminary information that Eric's team is working on to be completed by the end of this month to GDOT. So this is why you'll see task two being asked, and task three is, Eric alluded to, it's in the future, making sure that whoever is awarded the design, build, maintain contract through GDOT works with us as well as our consultants to make sure the uniformity is there as they move forward with their actual design drawings. And that does not need to be taken care of now, but that would be task three that you see in a future proposal.
Great, Pete, thank you. And I do appreciate the CID stepping up to help us do this. It makes a big difference, especially with everything else that's going on around us right now. I appreciate the private sector stepping up to help. Pete, I believe, I just wanted to clarify, when we've talked about this in the past, we do anticipate at some point in the near future that GDOT will be bringing forth an intergovernmental agreement that will cover all of these details. Is that still the case?
I am hoping so. One component of that MOU or IGA with GDOT is the actual dollars that Alpharetta will be willing to put towards these bridge improvements. What you see in
That's
front
what
of
I'm
you.
getting to. I'm just kind of making sure we're all still aware of the timeline of those decisions and what those commitments may be in totality, rather than breaking them off bit by bit, bridge by bridge.
Yes, Mayor. And GDOT has asked me if we give a dollar amount, and the current cost estimate that Eric's team has put together for these three bridges is $3.7 million for all three bridges.
Right. Okay. So are there any other questions or comments from council at this point? I'm not seeing any. Eric, I appreciate all your work, Pete. The same to you and the whole team. I know that it's been a moving target and it's been rapidly approaching. So y'all have done a great job with everything else going on around us to stay focused on getting these things done. I think it's a good improvement. For those here that have joined us from the public, this is a workshop, so we will not be voting on this item. It's not a business item. It's just an opportunity for us to hear the information and give feedback on that before it does come as a business item. So we do not have a public comment section. At the end of tonight's meeting, I will allow public comment, and feel free at any point, if you do have feedback, to use the chat function in Zoom, because we will record those comments and pass them along and answer questions in the future if necessary. Okay. So seems like we've basically covered everything on agenda item A for the bridge improvements over Georgia 400. We'll move on to the second workshop item, which is Ordinance Amendment Chapter 46, Article 2 of the City Code. And I believe Director Robison has this one.
I guess I have this one. Yes. Good evening. This is regarding.
Now.
I do now. That's right. So that's fine. I was prepared just in case. This is regarding some issues we've had with especially special events downtown and parking. And in the past, we've not been able to enforce temporary parking measures. So let's say, Saturday we have an event going on downtown and Parks and Rec wants to set up like they normally do, and we want to eliminate some areas for parking. We have not been able to enforce that in the past. We may say no parking, but we've not had any ordinance to actually enforce that. So now with this new ordinance that Sam's put together, and I'm assuming we'll be reading, when we do, basically I will have the authority to set up any parking measures we need to for temporary events or anything else like that in the future. So again, using special event as an example, if we need to restrict parking in certain areas, we can do that. I will be able to make that call and do that. And then we have the ability to enforce that via ticketing or citing someone and or also towing a vehicle if it came to that. Obviously, like we do with other measures like this, we would warn somebody first and ask them just to cooperate with us, but we would have the legal authority to cite somebody for illegal parking if needed be, and possibly tow their vehicle if that needed to happen as well.
Thanks, sir. Do we have any questions or comments from council on this item? Director, I'm not seeing any questions from council at this time. Is there anything else you would need from us if there's no questions or comments on what you're proposing?
No, sir. This is something we've been kind of working on for a while with Sam, and it's been an issue that came up, I know, a lot last summer, and we had a lot of issues with people parking where we had asked them not to, honestly, and again, had no way to enforce that. But now with this ordinance, we will also be able to, make the necessary enforcement action if needed. Again, our goal is to always just have people cooperate, and that would be what we would ask for. But if that does not happen, or if we have to, again, eventually even potentially tow somebody's vehicle to be able to move them out of the way, we can now do that. So.
Well, I'm not hearing anything from council to object to that. I would suggest that you go ahead and have that put together and have Sam bring it to us in a business item perhaps next week.
Okay, well, I thought we had, Sam, do we not have the ordinance already? I thought I read that today. Is that not fair? No?
Yeah. Okay, am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay, yes, the ordinance is ready to go. We'll just put it on the agenda.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, it's actually in your packet tonight.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Robison, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That'll wrap up the second workshop item for this evening. And we'll move on to the third final workshop item. Somebody clanging some ice around there? Sounds like a Yeti. Preliminary discussion fiscal year budget 2021 budget. Director Harris.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Last Monday at our workshop, we talked at a high level regarding the 2021 operating budget and the impact that COVID had. Provided some numbers and what that was obviously a big impact, putting us in a position out a couple $1 million. And we talked about some of the potential ways to solve that or as we move forward. And the update is that we're still working with departments this week and we'll get back with the mayor and Bob sometime this week. And we're hoping by first part of maybe end of this week or first part of next week, having a reasonable balanced budget for everyone's review. But with that said, as we go into the next sort of the phase of the capital phase of that budget, like every year we face a bit of funding or needs for recurring type capital. So I think, tonight is a good process to go ahead and look at our current dollars that we have funded for 2020 that are current appropriated for capital projects to see if there are some projects that we may be contemplating that we should maybe reprioritize, either to help fund maybe some of the recurring next year, or just to set aside, or any direction. And so the attachments that were provided show the available dollars and what departments in some notes. It may not be able to, well, there it is on the screen, a little difficult to see it, but it's by department. It gives the balances that are available or potentially available on the project, and whether or not encumbrances exist on the project, which means there's a purchase order. And so that was on that list. There was also another attachment for that unfortunately, and I apologize, we left out the current GO bond on the Parks and Rec 2016 and Transportation Bond 2016. That was a separate page. And then, well, pretty much those projects are on their way, but it does show their available balances. And we also attached the capital T-SPLOS funding future bond tracking list that Bob was working with council at the meetings prior to this. So gives us an idea again. First spreadsheet, primarily what's available in capital dollars, and getting some direction on things that we may want to reprioritize, or hold back, or put in unallocated. So as the mayor prepares to take the first round of getting a proposed budget next week out to everyone, we have an idea of maybe some other dollars that would help fund, either be held in reserve or help fund some of the recurring. That's all I have. If there's any questions on some of these projects, I guess that's what we're looking for direction.
Right. Thank you, Tom. And just, I know Councilman Burnett's already asked a question, but before we get started, I want to thank Tom and all of our directors and Bob for working all night and all day for the past few weeks, trying to make some sense of the situation now that so much has changed over the last couple of months. And I know it's been a lot of work and a lot of trying to make sense out of not a lot of clear numbers coming from revenue sources and tax revenues and projections and things like that. So I appreciate you getting us to this point and putting us in a good position for success moving forward. And just for the council and for the public's knowledge, one of the reasons I think it was good to have this conversation is because we've only got a few weeks left in this fiscal year budget. And so we had made back months ago some changes and budgeted things. And I just wanted to get a clarity from our council members this evening. If anything that we do want to go ahead and move forward with in the next few weeks, then now's our basically last chance to really go ahead and do those things. Otherwise, we'll just wait until the next fiscal year budget and do it. I've talked to several of you. I know Bob has spoken to several of you. But I think this would be a good time to let me and let our staff know whether you want to go ahead and use some of these resources now or just have it as one more comprehensive process in the next fiscal year budget. So if you will, please speak up and let us know what you think. Councilman Burnett, I'll lead off with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, Tom, I apologize because I know you're going to have to scroll, but will you go back to what the mayor had allocated for? It was a few line items on the bottom of the screen. I believe it was the second slide you showed tonight. Now, I'll wait until I catch up. It was the Lily Garden extension. It was Hopewell Roundabout. There are a couple others in there, but I know I'm going to.
Yep, it's on the first page Public Works slide on the first presentation. James. Yes, from Hopewell Vaughn down, just for clarity, Hopewell Vaughn roundabout at revised budget of $1,252,350, and on down through Marietta Street, Hawk. Those were all mid-year items.
Correct. So It looks like it's around a 1.5 million that we have not spent. Is that out of those capital projects that we paid out of yearly operational costs? Is that correct? I'm looking at the last 5 lines that you have on the screen.
Yes, you have 1,163,000 and 175,000.
Okay.
And
I don't know what anybody else's preference is. I know the Lily Garden extension, some of that's been, I don't want to say donated, but negotiated by community development. So I could understand why those costs are low, but it would be my preference to, seeing as that project's not going to be done for a little while, I don't see any reason that it can't be put on the shelf just from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. That's my preference, Mr. Mayor, is to hang on to that. And if there are other capital projects that haven't started, I would, or been awarded, I would like to hang on until, and just put them next year. I really don't see any harm between the end of April, so call it May 1st, and having this conversation again in July and just rolling those dollars to the bottom line. It's more important to me to show a balanced budget than to execute these today. Thank you.
if I can make a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, if on Lily Garden too, that is just, there was a match in the impact fee fund on the next page of about 595,000. That total project is 785,000. Now, that would free up monies in the impact fee fund, but obviously there's uses every year for items that could use that impact fee funds as well. So I just
Said Mr. Mayor, be it 1.5 million or 2, I prefer to hang on to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anybody else on council that would like to ask any questions or speak up? Councilwoman Richard, did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see.
You have the floor.
I would actually concur with Councilmember Burnett. I think that if we can hold on to whatever we made decisions on from a mid-year adjustment, the items that he just talked about with Lily Garden and Hopewell, I think fall into that category, as well as we did some allocation for parks in regards to bathrooms and so forth. I think that was about $1 million. So I would agree. I think we should take a very conservative approach. I think we're going to need it as far as looking at our budget for next year, and it's going to take us some time, I think, to see how things are going to play out with the last 5 or 6 weeks of COVID. So I would support holding on to those funds for anything that we haven't spent at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Binder, I see your hand up.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Tom, so is the question to, because you have about 4.2 and I guess suggestions amounts available for reallocation. So are these recommendations that you would move all of them or just to balance the budget? I counted to be about like 4.2, just eyeballing it.
Well, the parks I showed about $1 million plus, and then the other amounts that Binder mentioned, that was about 2. So I see 3, but
1.7.6 on the second page. But
yeah, I was just going to the mid-year projects and not all of them.
oh, okay, but I mean, so for your entire Excel sheet, so would the hope be to, again, just balance it towards a balanced budget, or take as much as we can and put it back in unallocated that we could reallocate?
Well, right now, I would think the argument is if you don't feel you need to do these right now, you would put it in unallocated, and then obviously this week the mayor's going to be looking at a whole list of next year's initiatives, and soon you will be as well, as far as a lot of recurring. So then we got to strike a balance between how much do we defer of that recurring, or and let me go back to something I mentioned last week and I didn't really bring up here today, is Normally our recurring is about $10 million a year. We fund about 50% of that 5 million from having successful years in the past and having a successful year last year in use fund balance. So about 50% comes from fund balance, $5 million. And that's like your savings account, you know, it doesn't do anything more than use it for one-time monies. The general fund actually has a line item for funding pay-as-you-go capital at about $5 million. In order to balance, again, we have not finalized all the numbers, and we will this week. It looks like we could balance, but we wouldn't have anything in the general fund, which is unusual to have, other than a small reserve. We usually have about $600,000, 1% of the budget, set aside reserve. But this is the year that general fund itself is going to need, in my opinion, to have a reasonable reserve in case we're just completely wrong on the revenue. So where do we get that reserve from? It's looking now, one of the thoughts is that we would not be on the full 5 million over to recurring, but instead fund 3 million. So now you get only 8 of the 10 that we normally would need each year.
And by recurring, you mean fleet replacement, stormwater milling and resurfacing, and all those types of things.
And yes, correct. Thank you. Yes, that's what we're saying. And so, in order to just hold back a reserve, you are reducing a funding source that's in our budget. And someday, you know, we hope that we get back to normal and we replace back that 2 million. First of all, that we don't need it from any revenue falls or anything else, and we get back to funding that 5. So to supplement it, if we feel like a lot of that recurring, we still don't want to miss the beat. We need to be able to fund $3 million, $4 million in milling and resurfacing. So we're going to take some of this one-time monies that you guys identified here and just reappropriate it towards that, so we can still keep, you know, sort of the ball moving and we don't slow down at funding our recurring. But I actually believe there's anywhere in between that, because we're going to be learning a lot over the months. We may want to just leave a lot of it in unallocated and just, as we continue through the budget, make those decisions, because we just don't know exactly where we're going to land anyway. So to answer your question, I think if you don't feel you need to do it really right now, you would unwind it. You know, no one's going to completely forget about it, know that those projects exist, but unwind what you can and let it be available for reserve as we work, or unallocated as we work to fund the recurring or anything else that you feel is important. Like we just mentioned, the GDOT, make sure we're fine with all the T-SPLOS matchings and all that as well. Hope that makes sense.
That makes sense. And then one I had specifically was the Councilmember Richard alluded to it, was the Parkland / Alpha Loop Fund that's down at 4.2 now. We had a 5 million at the beginning when we did the mid-year budget. It's at 4.2, but you're saying no, it cannot be reallocated.
Let me. We have a little bit of it. I guess it's an error on this sheet. When we appropriated the 795,000, we just did not bring the appropriate line item and funding for that. Let me just answer that one first. That was the additional parkland over here.
Yeah.
And that's being funded out of hotel motel fund balance. It should not have went against the 5 million as we know the 5 million. The 5 million, as we know it, is the sale of the hotel, Hotel Avalon sale, which we can't spend until we know we're actually going to close on that deal.
So can we, as part of the budget coming up, can we unwind that mid-year and kind of zero it out, and then
it would be zeroed out.
Evaluate. Yes. What's that?
It'll be zeroed out, and unless we hear in the next week it's going to close miraculously sometime real soon, we're going to zero.
Even with that, I think we should zero it out. Just
where you're saying where it goes, correct?
Yeah. Me personally, I would be as aggressive as possible in reducing our one-time capital expenses. And as much as we can pay for recurring, because the mayor's done a great job as far as saying, you know, it's never going to go away, this milling and resurfacing the stormwater. So a year we miss is just going to compound somebody else's problem in a future administration. So if it were up to me, anything that's within a 1-year capital project, like a roundabout, just zero it out for right now. Things like that are important, like the public safety, that I can't remember what we were going to do with the ladder truck replacement, but that type of thing, we get to put in money now for, you know, a 2-year waiting period on a fire truck. That's different, but you know, we should pay for that. But I like what you're doing here, and I'd even do more if it's possible on the capital projects, the one time, but just try to save as much as we can on recurring, because it's just going to compound issues. It's never going to go away. So any help we can give you there.
Will do.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
it.
That's
Thank
very helpful. I appreciate that, Tom. And Councilman Binder, I appreciate the feedback. That's helpful as we start looking towards the future as well. Councilman Binder, if you have no other questions, I'll move on.
That's it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell, I believe you were next in line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm fine with moving all of the available budget into unallocated. It's only 2 weeks, and we'll delve into it in much more greater detail with the budget. But right now, there's so many uncertainties in how the money is spent and how much we should spend or not spend. And with each passing day, we see it a little clearer, but it's still quite fuzzy right now. So just to err on the side of fiscal conservatism, I'd say move it to unallocated, and then we can make decisions based on that.
Okay. Thanks, sir. So
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Commissioner.
I had another one too, sir. Sorry.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I just want to make sure that Mayor Pro Tem, was that all you had? You didn't have any questions?
Bringing Jason back, it did remind me of this. The thing that concerns me about moving all the money out of the Alpha Loop, and we can discuss that with the budget, but that is the primary area. I was speaking with Director Cook this afternoon, and that's the area that we're seeing continued development around the Alpharetta Loop. So I don't think we want to send an economic development message that we're not continuing to invest in the city in that area. So I do think it's important that we look at that wisely, and but 2 weeks won't hurt.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't think we were going to be letting out any bids on that one between now and the new fiscal year anyway. So I appreciate that. And we'll keep that in mind as we put together the proposed initial budget suggestion.
Certainly. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. I'll go back to Councilman Binder for that follow-up question.
I forgot about that. The one other thing I had, but clarified Council Members Mitchell's concern. I was speaking to the Hotel Motel Parkland / Alpha Loop, but then there's a separate line account for the Alpha Loop, which I did not bring up. And yes, I think we should keep it because we have matching grants and there's a lot of catalysts going on that we're getting third-party funding. So I was not speaking to that at all. And then Tom, as a follow-up, just request, and I brought it up by the email to bring in the T-SPLOST and previous bond funding of 2016. If you could later on, because I know we were talking about it in relation to a future bond, but since we're putting that on hold right now, for this current year, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page too, that we include of our commitments on the T-SPLOST, the tier 1, and how that's going to be funded. And that was my other reason too. I still don't think we should just balance to get a balanced budget, but balance to our concerns of a lack of revenue coming in for that T-SPLOST funding to finish those projects of our current commitments to T-SPLOST. So if we can get kind of an exhibit on that too, just to make sure we're good and clear how much of a hole we're dug in because of this revenue shortfall for T-SPLOST. Please let us know more about that next week or so.
Got that, Tom?
Yes, we did provide it, the last one as part of the handout, and we'll continue to work that as, you know, all those T-SPLOST and take another estimate of what that T-SPLOST will we project it to be. And
yeah,
and that as well.
I can't see with the glare, but I'm looking at it too, and that's in relation to if we were going to bring a bond in, which that's looking less likely for this year. So
Yeah.
I need to see what it looks like, what we're going to do with our current capital constraints of revenue and everything.
We can pull that back to that first tier, 1 tier, 2 tier, but you know,
Right.
obviously
Absolutely.
it's going to be amended as well too, but yes.
Thank you.
All right, sir. I believe that was all from Councilman Binder. So Councilman Heights, I believe you had a question or a comment at least.
Well, you had solicited our input, and my input is similar to the other council members. I think Councilman Mitchell expressed it similar to how I feel about it. Given that the directors have gone through and created available money to be reallocated to the unallocated column, you know, we've been, you know, businesses have been through this cycle before. If we are on the front end of a potential economic downturn, we don't know, but you know, cash, in my way of thinking, cash is good. Cash creates opportunities. Cash creates flexibility. And since we're going to be having fiscal year 21 discussions to prioritize how we're going to spend available funds, you know, for the next year, I think we can do a better job of prioritizing if we move available funds into unallocated. And the big unknown, and you know, I throw it out there to you, Mr. Mayor, or Bob Regas or Tom Harris, is, you know, what can we reasonably expect by way of our primary revenues for property taxes? And we can always control our spending to some degree and make hard decisions, but we can't control how much comes in the offering plate. So, you know, until we have a grasp on what we'll have to work with, I think cash is good. So I would be in favor of moving the amounts that the directors found can be moved to unallocated. I think that would be a prudent thing to do.
Thank you, sir. Tom, you want to take a swipe at just his discussion about the property tax revenues? Because I believe in the discussions we had, you don't see as much volatility in the property tax revenues, at least for the next year or so, as you do with the sales tax revenues.
Yes, that's correct. And that's because, well, there's always an asterisk. But the county is supposed to assess those values based on January 1, assessed values as of January 1, 2020. So that has come and gone and was not affected by COVID as it relates today. They're not supposed to be looking into the issues that we're facing now. So we don't see an adjustment to what we were projecting in our property taxes, where we know we're going to have to pick up the additional $300,000 for the homestead exemption from, correct me, 40 to 45,000, which passed last year. So that is in there and in our numbers. So we've not really had seen an issue with pre-COVID, post-COVID on estimating our property taxes. Now, with that said, I think, you know, even if things turn around, that's the issue with property tax. They tend to lag what's going on. So next year, the valuations of commercial properties as we head into 12/30/2020, 1/1/2021, with potential vacancies or lower rents on things like that, we potentially could see valuation changes on the commercial side of things, and maybe even residential if we get the sympathy effect. You know, I don't know what's going on in the market or whatever, but sometimes it also affects how they assess things. You know,
But Tom, my concern was twofold. One is what, if any, effect it would have on property values for next year, and then the other is, you know, if it's a steep downturn, regardless of what those values are, people paying when they're supposed to be paying, and any shortfall that we might experience in that area. And even if it's a small percentage against a big number is a big number. So.
Noted, yeah.
Okay. Councilman Merkel, I believe you're the only one that hasn't spoken out. Did you have any questions or any thoughts on the matter?
Yes, but I don't need to go into all of it right here. I've been working with Tom behind the scenes, talking through it as liaison of finance. I think we're heading the right direction. Obviously, caution is the valor that we need to be continuing with as far as commit to and everything else. I'm in good shape, and we're continue to work on this behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate that. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments from council, Director Harris, I think I got a lot of clarity. Do you have what you need to get to work on this for next week?
Yes, I think I do. Yep.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. I do appreciate all y'all are doing over there.
Thank you.
So that'll wrap up the preliminary discussion for the fiscal 2021 budget. And we'll close out the workshop items for this evening. So this will be your opportunity. I believe we've got 35 participants here this evening. And so we'll try to allow some public comment. If anyone would like to, please reach out to James. Let him know that you would like to speak. We'll stick with the traditional 3 minutes of time. And hopefully we won't run over 30 minutes total. So if there's anyone that would like to speak, please raise your hand or reach out to James at this point. Public comment.
Mr. Mayor, I have no hands raised and have not received any chats.
All right, sir. That being said, we'll go ahead and close public comment for this evening. Do we have any reports this evening from council? Councilwoman Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not muted. Okay. I just wanted to give a shout out to our design review board members. We had a design review board meeting last Friday that was 4 hours over Zoom, and we had 3 public hearing applications. And from what I've been told, the meeting went really, really well. James, thanks for I know you were sitting in a support position. Brett and Ellie ran the meeting, and it went off really, really well. So I want to thank our board members for being able to adapt to such a new environment and for giving us the opportunity to get those applications heard in that particular venue.
That's awesome. 4 hours in a Zoom meeting. I can tell that's a tough one. I believe Councilman Burnett had his hand up next, and then I've got Councilman Merkel in line. So Councilman Burnett, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have sent out an email over the course of the last 4 weeks soliciting feedback to adding 1 or 2 questions to the Development Authority tax abatement checklist. Thank you to those of you who have written back to me. We'll be bringing that to workshop for public consumption next Monday. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, sir. Councilman Merkel, I believe you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for your leadership through this unprecedented situation that none of us have ever seen before. We've been through tornadoes, as I've said before. We've been through hurricanes. We buy water. We send the Rotary Club out. We do what we need to do to help. This is just totally new to us. So I'm going to just assume that everybody saw the governor's press conference today at 4 o'clock. We are, the state is opening back up for a large portion of what our business community is starting Friday. And you can go to the state's website. You can see the entire initiative. One thing missing from the initiative is the restaurants, because he's going to work on the details of that through the week, and that'll be later on. But basically Monday, the restaurants will be back open. Just as an observation, Councilman Burnett apparently found a barber that was working on the sly, because I don't know how he got that. I'll point out Councilman Binder, I think his hair grew an inch just in this meeting alone. So if I can find an opening with my barber, Jason, I will make sure to move you in front of me, even though I'm kind of getting the long-winded up front. That all being said, that all fun and games with it. We are moving forward. We are going through some big changes, and we're going to be in some times going with this city. And I couldn't be happier than to be with this group of 7 people right here to lead the city out of what we just went through, which is unprecedented, like I said. So I appreciate all of you, and let's just keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Was there anyone else on council? Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it bears mentioning that it's a great thing when our city is continuing to do business. The DRB is, and Councilman Richard just pointed out, just approved the new hotel off of Haynesbridge Road, just did all the finalizing of that. We still see construction going on in all the neighborhoods, and we did over 300 permits last week alone as a city. So it's a great message for where we are as economic development here in Alpharetta, and it's still continuing to happen here. The sun always shines on Alpharetta, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Richard, did I see you raise your finger again?
I did. Sorry, this is actually more of a question, and I think Sam is on our call. But to follow up what Councilmember Merkel was talking about with the governor lifting a number of the restrictions, I know Sam sent us the ordinance. I didn't have a chance to go through all 10 or 12 pages, but my question is, as far as the enforcement of the relaxation, my understanding was that, I guess my question is the authority still with the Georgia State Patrol and the sheriffs in regards to enforcing the relaxation? I think it's important for our constituents to understand where that sits. So I'm not clear where it sits.
Okay, well, this is Sam. I mean, and Dan, feel free to weigh in. It's my understanding, as long as his current order, and this is just a further a relaxation of it, it's still a preemptive order, and the authority is still with the governor. And of course, though, we're moving toward the expiration of that order on the 30th of this month. So we may need to consider if we need to address anything moving forward that we want to, keep in place. That's, and I'm speaking more in terms of business assistance and that sort of thing. I think we'll probably just, probably follow the governor's lead, as I do think they have the preemptive authority. So I think that's the way I understand it, that it is still, the governor still has the authority and control with the state.
Thank you, Sam.
I mean, I would just add to that, Sam, I think there's going to be some clarification coming by the end of the week, because I didn't catch in this press conference where he said that shelter in place was lifted, which is currently in place until the end of the month. So,
no, he didn't say it was lifted. It stays in place with these relaxations.
Right. So you still have to stay at home unless you're getting a haircut, Jason.
Or a massage.
This is my rally haircut. We're keeping this going.
Good for you. Good for you. No, I think it's fair to say, and Sam, you're exactly right. And to your point, Councilman Richard, there's going to be more clarification by the end of the week. I talked to Senator Albers this morning about what I thought was coming, or he thought was coming, and he clarified that. So, and for those of you that are available tomorrow morning, he's going to do another talk. So I'll be anxious to hear what he has to say. And it's also an opportunity tomorrow to present exactly those same questions as to, how do I shelter in place but get a haircut at the same time without going to jail? So anyways, done.
Thank you.
Any other reports? All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I believe this was our fourth electronic meeting since we did social distancing and stopped meeting in city council chambers. And I appreciate all the patience from the public and from our council members. James, you and your staff things ready and being able to manage this is no easy task. I do appreciate y'all mentioning the changes, and unfortunately, we didn't have an opportunity from a 4 o'clock press conference to digest it all and be able to lay it out here for you clearly. But you've got the gist of it, and we'll be continuing working with our staff, our communications team, and social media to let everybody know the changes that are coming. And we'll begin working, and we already have. I've already worked with City Administrator Bob Regas over the past week and a half to start preparing for the next phase of whatever this episode brings us, because we knew that, fortunately the disease has slowed down the spread, and if it slows down enough, we'll have to start resuming some type of activity. So our staff is already talking about ways that we can support the business community and still protect the public safety and everyone. So we'll have more for you next week, and you'll be catching it on other social media channels in the meantime. But thank you. Appreciate your patience. And with that said, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, everyone.